Welcome to Crossroad Connection. We're speaking out for those left unheard. My name is David Churinga. I'm the president of Crossroad Bible Institute and the host of your program. We have a special program for you today because we're going to talk about a subject that I don't know very much about, environmental justice. And we have in the studio with me today Jacqueline Doyon. Did I pronounce that right?
You got it.
Dr. Jacqueline Doyon,
That's correct.
who is a professor of criminology at the Grand Valley State University.
Mm-hmm.
And we are delighted to have you here with us.
Thank you very much for having me. Happy to be here.
Yes. Well, educate us a little bit. What is environmental justice? What is environmental crime?
Well, to start with environmental justice, it's more or less the equality, or I should say lack thereof, when it comes to making sure populations of all kinds can experience both the environmental goods and then subsequently don't have disproportionate exposure to environmental bads. So say, for example, traditionally minority and lower income populations are often more subject to the environmental bads, meaning pollution, or being located near waste dumps, or the siting for other types of negative environmental harms and impacts.
Environmental goods and environmental bads.
Yeah. So environmental goods then would mean public parks, access to beach or lake sources, or other types of recreation as well, or even just clean drinking water and clean air. We've noticed, for example, high levels of asthma in inner city youth populations because of the high levels of pollutions in those areas.
Wow. I can't say that I've ever thought about this even. And that's probably true for a lot of people.
I would agree with that, yes.
And so you can have environmental bads that are disproportionately hurting the people who are poor, the people who are down and out.
Correct.
The least of these.
Correct.
How do they happen to be in an environmentally bad place?
That's an excellent question. So when you think about location, right, especially real estate, location, if you have money, you're doing pretty well, middle class, upper class, you can pick a pretty nice location to live in, whether that's maybe a gated community, a suburban area, and you are removed from certain neighborhood, or you're within neighborhoods that are removed from waste dumps, for example. If you have less money, less access, maybe you need public transportation, it's going to limit where you can actually live and reside. And generally, we found that what compounds this is, even if you're already in an environment, let's say you've already purchased your house and you like your schools in your neighborhood, if a waste dump, for example, wants to be sited in your location, in your community, if the more economic resources you have, the more political power then you have, the more likely you are to be able to keep
it away from you.
Right, exactly. But if you don't have those resources, you don't have much, political power to do that, and therefore it's a lot more likely you're going to have more environmental bads coming in.
Wow, this is quite enlightening. Does the existence of environmental bads have anything to do with the lower life expectancy of people like in the inner city?
Yeah, in many ways it can. There are certainly lots of health impacts related. We've seen examples of cancer, higher rates of cancer, higher rates of asthma, complications when it comes to pregnancy, for example, higher rates of miscarriages, those types of things.
Wow.
All depending upon how close you are. And this is, I keep using waste dumps as an example, but this goes even for living near processing plants that are exerting high levels of pollution, or perhaps are actually leaking their waste into the soil or surrounding areas, which then
runoff,
leaches in, to the water system and can dramatically impact.
Wow. Okay, let's say there's a waste dump in a particular place, and people are what do you do about it? You can't remove the waste dump, right?
Correct. It's very difficult. The first, or I should, not necessarily the first, but one of the more prominent cases of environmental justice in the United States occurred in North Carolina, and I want to say Warren County. I might be misspoken there, but where they were bringing in, or they had just cited a landfill area that was going to be containing PCBs, which are very toxic chemicals that nobody wants near them. And they took as dramatic measures as they could. Unfortunately, this was a very low-income community. It was disproportionately filled with minorities even, which again are two components of environmental justice that usually go hand in hand. But they went so far as to lay down in the road in front of the trucks that were bringing the waste in
to dump it,
to try and stop them. And it halted it for a couple of days, but unfortunately that still went through, was carried out. And it wasn't until the late 1990s that they actually started to try and mitigate the impacts of the dump, and they were taking environmental steps in order to try and alleviate some of the chemical contamination. But unfortunately, even though it was highly publicized, it still happened.
It must be difficult to prosecute cases like this because the effects take years sometime, right? And then has to have very expensive studies to prove the case, right?
Correct. I mean, it's difficult, not just for those reasons, but also because up until recently, our environmental laws haven't been very strong.
They have been strong?
Have not been.
Have not been.
So we have them on the books. Starting in the 1970s, we saw lots of different environmental laws like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, et cetera, et cetera. But we've always struggled in the United States with enforcement. And our enforcement usually comes by way of fines. However, what a lot of companies have figured out that it's a lot more economically savvy to pollute and then pay the fines than to responsibly dispose of the chemicals or the wastewater or what have you in the first place.
And isn't there something about they can sell the credits or something like that to others?
You're talking about carbon emissions and those things. Yeah, we've started to do that now as well. So you can actually buy and purchase for carbon emissions. But that's a whole other level of just relating to global warming in general.
Now, this is just blowing me away, because like how in the world do you deal with the bad guys? And of course there's the economic piece of this where big business and so forth, they need to make a profit.
Sure.
And so you have these competing interests.
You do. And what's really interesting, and we were talking briefly about this earlier this morning, but as far as waste goes, we've been noticing a trend in electronic waste. So obviously we have technology, developments in technology. When we're done with these televisions and computers, what do we do with them? Well, most people throw them away. Some people might take them to a donation center, drop them off. That's all well and good. But eventually, if nobody purchases that old computer monitor or television, everyone wants flat screen now, it's going to end up in the garbage somewhere.
Right.
And what's been happening is we've actually in the United States, for example, been shipping a lot of our electronic waste, which contains harmful chemicals like, again, PCBs, mercury, all different types of bad things, lead that you don't want leaching into your environment. We ship them to countries such as China, India, recently on the western coast of Africa, like Nigeria and Ghana. And they don't have the technologies to properly recycle these electronics as we do here in the United States. So oftentimes they end up literally in mounds on the side of the road, just gigantic piles of electronic waste, which is very bad. So the irony, perhaps to me, is that we have taken garbage and actually turned it into a commodity. It's become a product, because when they transfer this, these electronics recycling companies, for example, will charge $15, $30, sometimes upwards of $50 to recycle your computer or television for you. Mm-hmm. Then they ship it, and when it arrives in these countries, they will pay per container ship, or maybe per product, $15 per product or something like that. So our companies here are profiting twice from these, knowing, oftentimes illegally shipping these, sometimes legally, but knowing that they don't have the technology to properly recycle them and that they are going to end up in waste dumps.
Wow. Well, this is of concern for us too, because we have satellite campuses like in Ghana and Nigeria and all those places. So our junk is going over there and sitting on the side of the road. Now let me provide a little bit of pushback of
Sure.
what I hear from the circles that I hang out in.
Sure.
Okay, and in some evangelical right wing kind of circles, they say, "Oh, wait a minute, we're just way exaggerating this stuff, way out of proportion, because God's going to take care of this earth, and He's got this all under control, and this is just a bunch of tree hugging green stuff." How do you answer that?
I would answer that, and we do have quite a bit of evidence that it's causing major problems. Even just the images. There are documentaries you can watch. There are lots of journalists who have gone over and taken photos or videos and documented this. Even to look at it it's startling and it's disturbing. But I would also argue from the standpoint that I think God would say, I gave you a pretty nice place here, and I expect you to take care of it. I've given you the tools to do so, and we know how to do so. I think that's the problem, is we have the technology here. In many European countries, they have the technology. India is really starting to develop the technology simply because of their population boom. They've recognized with just internal waste, let alone external waste coming in, okay, we've got to do something. So I think it really is up to us to recognize the problem and to be better consumers in the first place as well.
We need to be good stewards, and the cultural mandate does not say that we're to exploit the earth. We're to subdue it, but in a sense, probably of taking good care of it.
Sure.
And being good stewards of this creation. Now, what's going on to reverse this? You said that fines aren't really doing it.
Correct. So their enforcement is an issue, as well as the international problem of different laws and regulations. There is what's called the Basel Convention, which was a treaty designed to govern the transboundary movement of waste. Only 3 nations in the world have not signed on to that treaty. I'll give you a guess as to one of them.
Oh, us, huh?
Yeah, the United States. The other 2 are Haiti and Afghanistan.
Wow.
The only 3 nations in the world that haven't signed that. So we can, and I hesitate to say legally, but we ship our waste and don't violate that treaty as often as other nations would when they ship the waste. But that's one international agreement that we should really be a party of. But the second issue is, as far as enforcement goes, in the United States, we primarily just regulate CRTs, cathode ray tubes, which are found in those old computer monitors or old televisions. So we don't have as strict of regulation here as a lot of other industrialized nations do. So again, difference in laws. But what the United States has recently done, there was a a government accountability report in 2008 that took a critical look at our enforcement issues with the EPA and what we were doing and what we were failing to do. And they actually found that we didn't do a great job, and we let a lot go past our borders, so bypass our borders and be shipped illegally to other nations. For example, Hong Kong sent back multiple container ships to the United States saying, you've got CRTs in here, and this is illegal, and you know it, and not accepting, this waste. But in 2012, for the first time, criminal charges were filed against a company in Colorado.
I was just going to ask, is anybody going to jail for this?
They were just sentenced last month, and one will be serving, I believe, I'm trying to remember now, 18 months. And there were 2 executives at the top.
So this is white-collar crime.
Absolutely. One will be serving roughly 18 months, the other roughly 6 months. But again, they made millions and millions of dollars of profit. They knew exactly what they were doing. The question stands that is that a punishment?
Right.
Is that a punishment?
Because they'll get out of prison probably early, and they'll pick up where they left off with the money that they have. And I suppose it's difficult to get the general population excited about this too, because what the big business would say is that if we have to comply with all of these standards and so forth, it's going to raise the prices for the consumer.
Absolutely.
And no consumer wants that.
Absolutely. And we've seen certain states, California is actually fairly advanced in this, and they have a lot more legislation than the rest of the states, kind of regulating what you can throw out and what you can't. And there are consumer responsibility as well as producer responsibility requirements. So there is, for example, there are take-back programs. So if a big store, Best Buy, sells you a television. When you decide you're done with it, then they have to take that television back and properly dispose of it. And there are certain companies, Best Buy is one actually, that is what's called an e-steward. So a company that is being environmentally responsible. And if they've been certified as an e-steward, it kind of lets the consumer know if I do take my product back here, or if I'm purchasing my product back here, or purchasing my product here in the first place, that I'm being a little bit more environmentally friendly.
But of course, they don't know if they're selling that to Ghana or Nigeria
It's true,
as well, right?
right.
I remember my wife, has always been a recycler, and we lived out in the country one time, and she had to, she brought that recycling stuff like 15 miles away to this place where she would dispose of it, and did this week after week, year after year, only to find out that that guy was putting that stuff on a great big pile and burning it.
That's terrible.
And it's like it was all for nothing.
Yeah.
But I guess we just keep trying, we keep working at it, and as an educator, you are one that getting the word out to your students, and the more people understand and learn about this and the impact of it, the more they can get politically involved and make a difference.
Absolutely. And we're starting to see that with the younger population as well.
Right.
Yes, I have a class next winter that is an environmental crime class, so I'm looking forward to being able to raise the awareness, perhaps, with the primary consumers of electronic products.
Well, you have raised the awareness with our constituency, and we hope that that people really see the importance of this. And we would just thank you so much, Jacqueline.
Thank you very much for having me.
For talking about this.
It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for being here. We've been talking with Jacqueline Doyen, who is a criminologist or a professor of criminology over at Grand Valley State University. We've been talking about environmental justice, environmental crime. And so we hope that you've learned a lot, and we thank you, and we hope to see you again right here next week.